The road to Silverhold stretched across abandoned fields of dragon silk. Wind swept through the gray, withered tufts, producing brittle, fragmented sounds, no longer the gentle music of Silken Gate. The world was fading. What once shimmered like diamonds had become rotten threads, crumbling beneath their steps. Julian walked with visible weariness. The silk transformed half of his body seemed heavier the farther they moved from the kingdom's magical center. Each time he shifted, the joints of white silk emitted a dull, clicking sound. "Let's rest for a moment," Elara said, pointing toward an abandoned weaving workshop tucked against the hillside. They stepped inside. Dust filled the air. Decayed wooden looms stood like skeletal remains. Julian lowered himself onto a wooden bench, his silk arm resting motionless on his thigh. Elara took out a small portion of dried rations and a water flask, offering them to him in silence. "I'm sorry," Elara murmured, her gaze fixed on the silver scar encircling her wrist, "for cutting the knot without asking you. If I hadn't done that, maybe you wouldn't be carrying this burden." Julian took the flask with his still warm hand and looked at her with quiet gentleness. "It was a necessary exchange, Elara. Without that cut, we would still be puppets. At least now, this numbness belongs to me, not something imposed by another." Elara sat beside him. The space between them was small now, yet an invisible distance lingered. She wanted to touch him, tease the pain he carried, but the porcelain white part of his body stood like a cold warning. "Do you hear that?" Julian asked suddenly, tilting his head toward the old looms. "Hear what?" "The echo of threads." Julian closed his eyes. In Silverhold, the ancient weavers didn't merely create cloth. They wove memories. These looms are speaking of an age before the king sees the source. In the quiet of the workshop, Elara began to sense it too, a faint vibration spreading through the space. She reached out and touched a leftover strand of old silk still clinging to a loom. A hazy image surfaced in her mind. A woman weaving with her whole heart, every line vivid with color, and touched by transformation or pain. "That's the truth we're searching for," Elara breathed, hope lighting her eyes. Weaving magic was never meant to demand flesh and suffering. The king twisted it. Suddenly, from behind the decayed silk rolls, a small creature appeared, a silk dragon. But instead of its usual silver-white hue, it bore a sorrowful ash-gray color. It fluttered over and perched on Julian's silk shoulder. Rather than recoiling, it gently pressed its head against the cold white silk, releasing a soft sound like torn fabric. "It recognizes you," Elara whispered in wonder. "Dragon as mirror, it's reflecting your pain." Julian lifted his left hand and gently stroked the small creature. "It's like us, wounded by this world's decay. It will lead us to the ancient weavers deep within Silverhold." The pale afternoon light filtered into the workshop, casting their shadows across the dusty floor. They were no longer the court's disentangler and weaver, but two souls carrying the faintest hope of mending a breaking reality. The true struggle had only just begun, and the trust between them was the only thread strong enough to guide them through the mist ahead. Gray mist shrouded the entrance to the Silverhold Valley. Unlike the artificial brilliance of Silken Gate, this place carried the quiet dignity of things long forgotten by time. The ancient trees here bore no leaves, only aged, colorless strands of silk cascading from their branches like streams that had lost their voice. The ash-gray silk dragon guided them, gliding lazily ahead and releasing soft cries to signal the way. Julian moved with great difficulty. The silk transformed half of his body now seemed to respond to Silverhold's air, grew heavier, emitting faint glimmers of silver light. "We're close," Elara encouraged him, wrapping an arm around his waist and helping him through a narrow rock crevice. She felt the rigidity of the white silk beneath Julian's clothes. It was cold and lifeless, yet she no longer pulled her hand away as before. Instead, she held him tighter, as though her own warmth might slow the encroachment of that unfeeling material. They emerged from the crevice, and the sight before them took Elara's breath away. At the heart of the valley stood a small village, its rooftops woven from coarse, earth-toned silk. The people here wore no luxurious fabrics, yet their clothing glowed with natural colors: berry red, forest green, and the gold of late afternoon sun. This was Dragon's Sanctuary, a community that survived through harmony with nature, rather than exploitation of the dragon's silk source. "Who goes there?" An aged voice called from behind a large loom set in the center of the small square. An elderly woman stepped forward. Her hands were not hardened into white silk like those in the palace, but marked with deep lines carved by labor and time. She studied the silver scars on their wrists, then paused at Julian's silk-transformed arm. "Carriers of a flawed knot," she murmured. "You have brought the breath of collapse with you." Julian bowed his head, his voice weak. "We came seeking a way to weave without sacrifice. The kingdom is unraveling, honored one." The woman approached and placed her roughened hands gently against Julian's face, right where the white silk had begun to spread. He did not pull away. A strange sensation ran along his spine, not the painful surge of magic, but a gentle, human understanding. "Poor boy," the old woman sighed. "You have borne too much of another's decay. Come inside. The mist here will hide you from the king's eyes, but it cannot hide what has already broken within." She led them into a small room scented with herbs. Elara helped Julian lie down on a bed woven of reed and vine. The moment he reclined, exhaustion overwhelmed even the strongest disentangler. He drifted into a restless sleep, his hand still clutching the edge of Elara's sleeve. The old woman turned to Elara, her gaze sharp, as though seeing straight through her. "Girl, you carry silver shears meant to sever fate, but do you know that it is love that can truly reweave what has been lost?" Elara lowered her head, her hand gently brushing Julian's hair. "I once believed I was only a weaver of hatred, but watching him fade like this, I realize I would trade every color in the world for the return of a single, ordinary heartbeat." "Then prepare yourself," the old woman said, her eyes drifting to the radiant threads upon the loom. "The ritual of reweaving the soul will demand that you face the most painful fragments of memory. If you are not strong enough, the thread will snap, and both of you will remain forever trapped within this mist." Night descended over Silverhold. Wind passed through the old silk strands, carrying a melody both mournful and hopeful. Elara sat beside Julian, knowing that tomorrow they would face a battle where the weapon was not silver shears, but the naked endurance of the soul itself. The herb-scented room lay submerged in the stillness of Silverhold's deep night. Julian lay there, his breathing faint and uneven. Moonlight spilled through the window, illuminating the porcelain white half of his face, at once beautiful and mournful. Elara sat beside him, her fingers tightly interlaced with his left hand, still warm, as if she feared that letting go would allow him to dissolve into the mist outside. The elderly weaver entered, carrying a wooden tray filled with skeins of thread colored like sunset and deep forest. She set them on the table and gestured for Elara to stand. "To save the human part of him, you must reweave what has been taken," the old woman said in a low voice. "But be careful. These threads are not woven by hand, but by consciousness. You must enter Julian's most painful memories to find the beginning of the transformation." Elara drew a deep breath and took out the silver shears. "I'm ready." The old woman lit a kind of incense made from the bark of an ancient dragon tree. Pale blue smoke spread, enveloping both Julian and Elara. At once, the space around them began to distort. Elara felt herself being pulled into a vortex of brilliant yet thorn-laden threads. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in the great hall of Silken Gate, but as it had been many years earlier. A young Julian knelt before the throne. There were no white silk patches on his body, and his gray eyes shone with pure faith. "You will be the disentangler of this kingdom." The king's voice rang out, authoritative and false. Every knot you untie will be a blessing for the people. Elara watched as Julian began to touch the first strands of fate. Each time, he untied a knot for a poor family or a lost merchant. A small white mark appeared on his finger. He looked at it in surprise, which soon turned into quiet acceptance. He believed it to be an honor, a testament to his devotion. She saw Julian sitting alone in the palace library, silently watching his hands gradually lose all sensation. He had no one to confide in, no one to lean on. He was turned into a symbol, a tool gilded by the court's praise. The pain of his loneliness struck Elara so powerfully that she broke into tears. She stepped closer to Julian's shadow within the memory, reaching out to touch him, but the image shattered abruptly. In its place spread a thick darkness. Within it appeared a vivid red thread, the very strand the king had used to parasitize Julian's destiny. It was siphoning life from his heart, converting it into energy to sustain the crown's youth. "So this is the beginning," Elara whispered. She raised the silver shears not to sever the thread, but to pry the red strand loose from the web of memory. Yet the moment the blade touched it, a colossal visage of the king emerged from the dark mist, his eyes blazing with fury. "You dare trespass upon my loom, weaver?" The voice thundered within her mind. The shock hurled Elara out of the vision. She jolted awake, her clothes drenched in sweat. Before her, Julian also stirred, jerking upright with wide, stunned gray eyes. Their wrists marked by the silver scars were burning with intense heat. He's watching us," Julian gasped, fear filling his gaze as he looked at Elara. "The king placed a woven eye inside my mind. Every step we take is seen by him." The old weaver's face turned grave. "Your time of rest is over. If he has discovered your presence here, Silverhold is no longer safe. You must leave immediately before the crown's hunters arrive." Elara clasped Julian's hand, tension coiling tightly around them. They had found the truth, but that truth was also the death sentence the king had already prepared. "Where will we go?" Elara asked, though she already knew the answer. "To where all threads begin," Julian said, as he rose, his body still trembling. "We will return to the original loom, but this time, we will not weave for him. We will weave for ourselves." The darkness that enveloped Silverhold Valley brought no sense of peace. It felt like a black silk cloth, slowly tightening around the breath of those on the run. Julian forced himself upright, his back leaning against an old stone loom. The silver light from the scar around his wrist flickered in rhythm with his heartbeat. It was a warning glow, a signal that the king's woven eye had begun to observe everything through Julian's own sight. "Don't look into my eyes, Elara," Julian said, his voice hoarse. He hurriedly wrapped a strip of coarse silk around his eyes. "If I see you, he will see you. He's using my mind like a reflecting mirror to locate us." Elara froze. Her hand, which had been reaching out to help him, stopped mid-air. She looked at the man before her, half a magnificent porcelain white statue, half a human trembling under the immense weight of royal power. A sharp pain clenched her chest, more cutting than the edge of the silver shears. "We can't go on like this," Elara said firmly. She didn't step back. Instead, she moved closer, taking his left hand, the one that was still warm with human life. "If he wants to see, then let him see our defiance. I won't let you walk through the dark alone." An old weaver, her face a map of ancient sorrows and wisdom, handed them 2 cloaks woven from dragon grass, a material known for its ability to disrupt magical tracking threads. "Follow the paths of the ash dragons," she instructed, her voice a low whisper like rustling leaves. "They do not spin silk to hoard it, they spin it to erase all traces. You must go toward the throne of whispers, the place where the world's discarded threads are cast away. Only there will the king finally lose his control over you." They left the village, which was shrouded in a thick, protective mist. Julian stumbled as he walked, his every movement a testament to his struggle. The silk wrapped around his eyes was already soaked through with the translucent liquid, like liquefied dragon silk dripping from his very soul. Each step was a battle for control, his will fighting against the parasitic magic of the king, a relentless force trying to claim his mind. "Why haven't you left yet?" Julian suddenly asked as they rested beneath an ancient, sprawling tree. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and old wood. "The black knot is gone. You're free now. You could take the silver shears and just vanish beyond the borders, go somewhere he could never find you." Elara sat beside him, close enough to hear the faint, almost imperceptible clicking of the dragon silk joints within his shoulder, a constant reminder of the magic that now held him together. She smiled, a sad but peaceful smile that seemed to hold all the light in the dim forest. "Freedom without you would only be another broken thread," she said softly, her voice a balm to his tormented mind. "I was once a weaver who knew only hatred. My world was woven from anger and revenge. But you, Julian, you taught me that even the most tangled knots deserve to be undone with gentleness. You are the most beautiful pattern I have ever encountered in my life." As she spoke these words, their wrists suddenly burned. The silver scars around them flared with an intense light, releasing a wave of pure energy that dissolved the surrounding mist in an instant. For a brief, breathtaking moment, they saw one another not through their physical eyes, but through the profound, unbreakable bond of their souls. In that flash of connection, Julian glimpsed Elara's painful childhood memories, the loneliness and fear that had shaped her, and Elara, in turn, saw Julian's unspoken, desperate longing to be loved, a vulnerability he kept hidden beneath layers of duty and sacrifice. This intimacy went far beyond any physical touch. It was the naked, unfiltered merging of two entwined destinies, a recognition that their paths were now one. Then, without any warning, the thunder of thousands of dark wings tore through the night sky, coming from the direction of the palace. The crown's hunters, the king's most feared enforcers, had breached Silverhold's protective mist. Torchlight began to flicker and spread, encircling the mountain's base, like a tightening noose of fire and steel. "He's here!" Julian sprang to his feet, tearing the blindfold from his eyes with a surge of desperate energy. His eyes were no longer the gentle gray Elara knew. They burned with a faint red hue, the unmistakable mark of magical intrusion, the sign that the king's will was taking hold. "He's trying to control me to make me attack you, Elara. Run, please. You have to run." But Elara did not run. She drew the silver shears, their polished surface glinting in the encroaching torchlight. But she did not point them toward the enemy. Instead, with a swift, steady hand, she gently cut a lock of her own dark hair. With deft fingers, she quickly wove it into the silver scar that encircled Julian's wrist, binding a piece of herself to him. "If he wants to turn you into a weapon," she declared, her eyes blazing with the fierce and unyielding resolve, "then I will weave you into a shield." They stood back to back as the encirclement tightened, the sounds of armor and shouting growing closer. One bore the cursed eyes of a king, the other wielded the hands that wove hope from despair. The battle at the borderlands had begun, a conflict fought not just with magic and steel, but with a love that was no longer a weakness. It had become the only thread strong enough to overturn an entire dynasty. The beating wings of the black dragons tore through the quiet night sky like giant shears. Torchlight from the royal hunters closed in, forming a ring of fire around Julian and Elara. The air grew thick with the stench of tracking magic, a rusted, metallic smell that tightened the lungs. "He's here, inside my head," Julian roared, his silk-formed hand slamming into the rocky ground. Faint red streaks flickered in his eyes, pulsing in rhythm with the distant palace. The king was forcing control through the dragon silk joints of Julian's body, turning the disentangler into a living war puppet. Julian's porcelain white arm rose against his will, fingers sharpening into silk blades aimed straight at Elara's throat. "Julian, look at me," Elara shouted, refusing to step back from the trembling edge of silk so close to her. She pressed her silver-scarred hand to his forehead. The strand of her hair woven into his wrist flared to life, forming a protective filter. Magic born of willing devotion collided with the parasitic sorcery of the crown. A sharp burst of energy cracked through the air, forcing the hunters behind them to recoil, blinded. "Seize them. Do not let the vessel be damaged." The marshal's command rang out. Elara clenched her teeth. She knew brute force would never overcome an entire regiment. Raising her hand into the air, she executed the fastest weaving motion she had ever learned. She did not weave cloth, she wove sound. She struck the silver scar on her wrist. A piercing wave of resonance spread across the valley, carrying the frequency of the ash dragons. At once, the ash dragons, dragon as sanctuary of this forgotten land, answered. They released vast amounts of ashen silk, forming a thick, clinging wall of mist that severed the hunter's advance. Now, Elara grabbed Julian and pulled him toward the abyss of the Throne of Whispers. Within the ash fog, the pressure in Julian's mind eased, but the backlash struck immediately. Cracks spread across his silk fingers, emitting a fragile silver glow. Each fracture marked a piece of his soul wounded by resisting the king's command. They reached the forest's edge, where the world's discarded threads tangled into massive thorny silk brambles. Here, the king's magic faltered, drowned by millions of whispered destinies cast aside. Julian collapsed beside a slow-moving stream of silk. Gasping, sweat soaked the cloth around his neck. "I saw his plan," Julian whispered, his voice nearly lost to the wind. "He doesn't just want us as filters. He wants to use these silver scars to weave a new kind of dragon silk, one that can dominate the will of everyone in Silken Gate. We are carrying the root thread of enslavement." Elara knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her clothing to absorb the silver light leaking from the cracks in his hand. Pain twisted her chest. The truth was brutal. Their love and sacrifice, the very things they believed would defy the king, were being exploited to forge an even crueler chain. "Then we won't let him succeed," Elara whispered, resting her cheek against his cold hand. "If this scar is the root thread, we will stain it with resistance until it becomes useless to him." Julian looked at her. His eyes, once clouded, cleared again. With his human hand, he gently touched her face. Intimacy on the edge of catastrophe tasted both sweet and bitter. "You always know how to weave hope from ashes, don't you?" Together, they turned toward the path, descending into the Throne of Whispers. Darkness still lay ahead, but for the first time, they were no longer fleeing in fear. They were running toward a final exchange, one meant to claim their right to exist as truly human. The silver scars on their wrists softened, radiating a gentle warmth like a silent vow. No matter how torn the fabric of life became, they would reweave it together, with their own breath and heartbeat.